Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and happy 2025. We are in the Rabbi Samuel Mitchell Sanctuary, taping on Wednesday, January the 8th. Colleagues, I'm so excited about this class and friends who are watching online. I want to talk today about our soul, our neshama, and what it means for us when we wake up every morning of our lives, and how our deeds shape our soul, and how our soul shapes our deeds. I was turned on to this topic by, I was reading a book called Circle of Hope by Eliza Griswold. She is the daughter of a great evangelical preacher who was the head of an evangelical movement which split apart on the issue of gay rights. And she has become a journalist of religion in America. And she was very curious about the evangelical movement. It's generally very conservative politically, but there was an offshoot that was very liberal, a very liberal evangelical church. And she writes a book about it called Circle of Hope, very interesting book. And in the course of describing the growth of this church, the church would meet and it would attract, it had a lot of energy and pulse in its formative stage. And the question that always powered people coming in was, how is it with your soul? How is it with your soul? When you wake up in the morning, are you angry and aggrieved and you have a chip on your shoulder and you're the last angry man and you're on the, honking your car in traffic, and when the light turns green and the next driver doesn't ride, are you that kind of soul? Or are you zen and good and you ride above the waves and you're just grateful for the gift of life? What kind of soul do you have? How is it with your soul? How do our deeds shape our soul? How does our soul shape our deeds? That's what we're going to talk about, and we're going to look both at the Torah and the Haftarah for this coming Shabbat, Vayechi. So let's thank God for the gift of learning Torah together.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. והערבנה אדוני אלוהינו את דברי תורתך בפינו ובפי עמך בית ישראל, ונהיה אנחנו וצאצאינו וצאצאי עמך בית ישראל, כולנו יודעי שמך ולומדי תורתך לשמה, ברוך אתה אדוני המלמד תורה לעמו ישראל, ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר בחר בנו מכל העמים ונתן לנו את תורתו.
So, colleagues, to frame our exploration of our souls and the relation between deeds and souls, I want to look at the end of Joseph's life and how his deed shaped his soul and vice versa, and the Haftarah, which describes the end of King David's life. And let's jump into the Haftarah because it's so very interesting to me. It feels like David has two very different souls, but of course, he has one soul that is very, very rich. So, Eliza, would you pick, we're on page 5 of the handout. This is the Haftarah for Vayechi. Will you read the first paragraph, please?
When David's life was drawing to a close, he instructed his son Solomon as follows. I am going the way of the earth. Be strong and show yourself a man. Keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and following his laws, his commandments, his rules, and his admonitions as recorded in the teachings of Moses, in order that you may succeed in whatever you undertake and wherever you turn. Then the Lord will fulfill the promise that he made concerning me. If your descendants are scrupulous in their conduct and walked before me faithfully with all their heart and soul, your line on the throne of Israel shall never end.
Okay, so far so good. So how would you describe David, and he's dying, he's on his deathbed. How would you describe so far his dying instructions to his son Solomon?
Well, I think it's good to start, but the last line's a little troubling. It's a little Machiavellian, actually. It's all about it's all about continuing the kingship, the throne, and whether that's actually necessarily a good thing.
Okay, so right, so there is it's reward and punishment. It's charva onesh, and the reward is you'll get to stay as king, and the kingship will stay in our family. But what do you have to do in order to do that?
Be good.
Be good.
Be good, right.
This is a blessing that, in our days, anybody will do to our kids.
Yeah.
Right. Follow, read the Torah, follow the Torah, right. And also note, if you look at verse 3, and you see this in the English, the way it's translated with, his capital H, and you see it in the Hebrew in terms of the possessive, He's really saying your life is not about you, it's not about me, it's about God, right? The way we would translate it today if we were writing it. Keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in God's ways, following God's laws, God's commands, God's rules, God's admonitions as recorded in the teachings. And you see that in the Hebrew, bidrachav, chukotav, mitzvotav, mishpatav, ve'edotav. It's all about how does God want us, what does God want of us? And if you follow what God wants of us, then good things will happen, including in our family, really good things. We get to be king. It's good to be king. Okay, so far so good. Keep going, Eliza.
Further, you know what Joab, son of Zeruiah, did to me, what he did to the two commanders of Israel's forces, Abner, son of Ner, and Amasa, son of Yether. He killed them, shedding blood of war in peacetime, staining the girdle of his loins and the sandals on his feet with blood of war. So act in accordance with your wisdom, and see that his white hair does not go down to Sheol in peace. But deal graciously with the sons of Barzillai the Gileadite, for they befriended me when I fled from your brother Absalom. Let them be among those that eat at your table. You must also deal with Shimei son of Gera, the Benjaminite from Bahurim. He insulted me outrageously when I was on my way to Machanaim. But he came down to meet me at the Jordan, and I swore to him by the Lord, I will not put you to the sword. So do not let him go unpunished, for you are a wise man, and you will know how to deal with him, and send his gray hair down to Sheol in blood.
So I just find this such a rich and interesting haftarah. David's last words to his son are not "I love you," and they're not "thank you," and they're not "forgive me." It's "kill that SOB," right? That's his last words: is "kill that SOB," and he goes. That's the end. And specifically, "V'horadata et sevato b'dam Shaol." You know, his last thing is an instruction to kill somebody. And when you double click on this whole last instruction, it's particularly egregious because why does David want him to kill him? It's not that he committed an act of violence or a crime against David. He insulted him. He said words that were very displeasing and offensive to him. And then David swore to him by the Lord, I won't kill you. So I made a vow to God. And my last move is I'm so aggrieved by the words this guy said against me, I have to figure out how to get around the vow to God that I made that I wouldn't hurt him. So my dying wish is that we can tag. I can tag you, and you'll figure it out, and you will kill him the end of my life. You will kill him. So I'd love your reactions about that, and in particular, one last thing, just to frame it, the juncture point between these two parts of his charge, one, follow God's laws, it's not about you, two, kill the SOB, is vagam, and also, or further. Tell us about how you interpret David's, the second half of his charge, or what that says about him as a person.
To me, it's full of contradictions because first at the beginning, he starts, when you stop the first time, follow the rules of God, follow the laws, follow, all the good things that religion is supposed to be. And then goes to, but by the way, he insulted me, just kill him. But then also, he's contradicting himself at the top of this page when he says, bechochmatecha, at your wisdom. It's like saying, do what you feel like you should do to it. So to one says, kill them, to other one says, sit in your table, and the other one, use your wisdom.
I almost
Doesn't
feel
make any
like
sense.
in that way there are three parts to this because that second piece here with Zeruiah is actually a grievous injury and a potential problem for anyone who wants to live in righteousness and blessing. If you want to protect people, you want to cut off people who attack others in, as he said, in an act of war during peacetime. You want to actually. So the fact that he leaves that as you do what you think is best here. You're so wise, my dear child.
Right.
But then is absolutely convinced in the last piece and very directive about what happens in that third segment. Really, I think brings out even more the importance of what you're saying about the anger that King David has been carrying around that he himself has not been able to come to terms with in his own life.
Yeah, so Michelle, so let's just talk about that. This is a question ever since Shira has been training as a coach. This is her go-to question, which is, how does whatever it is that you're doing or feeling at the moment serve you? How does it serve you? So how does Dave, I mean, like, this is his last moment on planet Earth, and this is his last conversation with his son. How does it serve David that that's his last instruction, his last word? And what does it say about his soul? And what does it say to us about ours?
There's a little less contradiction, I think, here than at the beginning. So at the beginning, he says we follow God's ways, and we have had discussions in this class where we've shown that sometimes God can be a very vengeful God, and there's so many. We talked about what the 450 people that are put to the sword. I forget how many years ago that was. And if we follow God's ways, God is a contradiction as well. To follow God's ways doesn't always mean to be to do what we think is the right thing, the kind thing, the gentle thing, but can sometimes be following God in such a way that we have to perform deeds that may not resonate properly with our soul. So I think that's a little bit more of a deeper conversation than we have time for today. And the other thing is that in terms of like David seems to be much more concerned with loyalty to him, I think, than loyalty to the Jewish people. I think that's a little bit complex.
So there's a lot of personal aggrievement, and I thank you, Dan. And I want to come back to because you kind of highlighted the issue of anger that he's been carrying around. What does this say to you, Michelle, about David's soul? And what does the fact that the anger that he's been carrying around, as you put it, he didn't have a healthy way to discharge, so that at the end of his life, he's just consumed by anger. And think about it. Just zoom out. Here, David could have said, wow, what a life. And I'm a shepherd's son. And look at this journey. And also I wrote Psalms and King and etc. And instead of focusing on what's right with his life, he focuses on grief and anger. So what does this tell us about David's neshama, and what did we learn from it?
I mean, it's so interesting to me in the context of a world that feels very foreign, right? To be a king at that time is something that I feel I mean, this feels a little like an episode of the Game of Thrones, right? It's not a world that I feel like I can have a lot of insight into, because in the time of kings, it is perhaps actually a legitimate thing to say, my enemies are your enemies. I need you as the next generation to take care of my enemies. And so I'm holding on to this, maybe out of vengeance and anger and a heart that doesn't know where to go, and I still have unresolved issues, and I really should be saying, I love you. Please have a good life filled with meaning. But instead, I'm saying, kill my enemies. Right. Or maybe actually this is something that he feels that will threaten his kingdom in the future. And I don't actually, I have a lot of humility about that, because I don't know a lot about
that. I just have I want to give King David a more favorable read, because I don't necessarily think that he's in a bad space here. I think it's totally possible that he's reviewed his life and he's done that reflection. He's thought about the good that's in his life. And in this last moment, he's like, I have some unfinished work that I don't feel good. I don't feel good about allowing these 2 moments of deep pain to stand. And I don't feel good that not only did I not stand up for myself when this guy insulted me, but I swore that I would protect him, and that doesn't feel good. And you, as my child, I'm hoping that you can be my living legacy, and I'm hoping you can continue my work. And this is what's unfinished. And I think the reality is, for so many people, when they reach that last chapter, part of the life reflection is really recognizing the work that remains undone. And it feels unsavory in our eyes, these two things. But I'm not sure that fighting against someone who attacks in peacetime is bad. And I'm not sure that saying like, I don't stand up for myself. Like, actually, that really hurt, and I never spoke about it, and I never said anything. I actually was just like, I played the peace card, and that didn't feel good.
So I love the empathy with which you're seeing King David in this point, but I'm trying to see this also in light of the other image that we have of him, which is sort of old, can't get warm, can't find comfort in relations with a woman that's brought to him. You know, like there's a sense in which our sacred texts bring us David at the end of his life, not so much as, you know, I'm sitting here reviewing all of what has happened, and these are the couple lost things that just need to be ticked off, but rather as a person who is diminished.
So can I just, it's so interesting, I guess, you know, they say there's Shivim Panim LaTorah, 70 faces of Torah. I just have such a radically different, I mean, Michelle, your comments are about humility induced by the fact that we're not a medieval king or a pre-modern king, which we're not pre-modern kings, and Eliza, you have this view of radical empathy of how David might have this didn't feel good and that didn't feel good, and etc. I just look at this as such a role model of what not to do. And we've all been around the bedside of a person who's dying, and we've all been around the bedside of a person who's dying, and their children and grandchildren are there. And the energy and the vibe, now maybe energy and vibe are 2025 terms or concepts and not, you know, pre-modern concepts, but the energy and vibe of kill this one, kill that one, just feels really troubling to me. Put this way, I would not, you know, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I wouldn't want this to be my energy and vibe as I'm leaving. I love you, thank you, and I'm sorry for failing you, and thank you. I don't want kill this, kill that. And by the way, also, like, my unfinished business feels really if unfinished business is continue to learn and do Torah and do mitzvah, and, you know, ach tov v'chesed yirafuni kol yemei chayav, you know, v'shavti b'veit Adonai li'archimim, the rest of Psalm 23, the end, the goodness and mercy shall follow you all the days of your life, and I'll dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That's unfinished business I can believe in, but I have some dirty work that I couldn't finish, so son, please do it for me. Gross. Hate that.
But what I like about this is that it's very much real. I think our instinct when people pass is to give a very sanitized version of who they were, to just only speak the best about them. I think it's psychologically healthy and important for us to remember not only the grace and the gifts that they brought to this world, but also their complexities and their challenges. And our texts actually give us a role model for that.
Great. So let's look, if that's a perfect pivot to the contrast to David, which is Joseph and his brothers. Eliza, we looked at this text last week when it was just you and me. But I find the last conversation that Joseph has with his brothers so deeply revealing. And Michelle, would you read that? We're on page 1 of the handout, verse 15. It's just 2 paragraphs. When Joseph's brothers saw.
When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph still bears a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrong that we did to him?" So they sent this message to Joseph. "Before his death, your father left this instruction. So shall you say to Joseph, 'Forgive, I urge you, the offense and the guilt of your brothers who treated you so harshly. Therefore, please forgive the offense of the servants of the God of your father.' And Joseph was in tears as they spoke to him."
Right. So in other words, just to slow this down, the context here is the brothers had just all gone to Israel to bury Yaakov, Jacob, in Ma'arat HaMachpelah. It's not only the brothers and Joseph, but it's a lot of officials from Egypt. The brothers are afraid. Now Joseph's going to kill us. Dad is dead. Joseph's going to kill us. So they come up with this big lie, right? And they send him an email. "Hey, Joseph, really beautiful service for Dad. Thank you so much for arranging it. It was so moving to see you and your colleagues in the Egyptian administration. We're so grateful to you. Joseph, we just wanted to tell you that before he died, Dad told us, please tell Joseph after I'm gone and after I'm buried that my last prayer is that he will be generous to you. Please don't hurt my other children. Don't hurt your brothers. Love, Dad." And that was he wanted us to tell you that. That, of course, is a lie, and it's a lie that betrays their fear. And so after all they've been through, the brothers still think Joseph might kill them. And that's how broken it is. And I wanted to just examine that last line, and Joseph was in tears as they spoke to him. Why do you think Joseph was in tears as they spoke to him and came up with this lie?
Well, I think partially because Joseph had already shown his forgiveness. They've already been forgiven, you know. So the fact that he thinks that the fact that he thinks his father may have not even recognized that, I think it's a very telling moment for him at that moment.
So in other words, he's crying because after all I've tried to do, it's still so broken.
Yes.
Yeah, or I think the pshat of the text there is that he's hearing this message from his father, or at least he thinks that perhaps it came from his father. Maybe it's true. There is either an element of, wow, he really thought that of me. I thought we had gotten to a good place. Or there's the element of like, of course not. I won't do that.
But there's also, we've just been through the death scene where Jacob, for some kids he was okay, but for many he was not nice. Like we've skipped over the scene where he insults some of his children and curses some of his children and all of this. And I wonder if Joseph is crying because there's a distance between the Jacob on his deathbed and the Jacob that the brothers are describing here. And he wishes what it would be if that death scene moment with Jacob had been
more healing,
and him saying guys, we got to come together. I want you all to be a team. I know that you had some moments in your past that were really painful. I know that you haven't actually been able to resolve that, but my hope after I'm gone is that you're going to work it out and you're going to be a team and you're going to work together as brothers. And I believe in you and I love you. That's not what happens. And so the distance between there and for him knowing they're never going to repair their relationship. They're never going to get to this place of being all brothers and all together.
Right.
Yeah,
so then
and one more thing. I have a little different perspective on this. In addition of what you said, is that let's not forget that Joseph was a foreigner, right, living in Egypt. And when you are a foreigner, you sometimes cry because of all the things you missed, all right? All the experiences that you missed with your brothers and your parents, and all the things that you were never able to repair because of the distance.
Right. Thank you, Eliza. So there's, in other words, the context here, and this is just so important because we're thinking about soul and how does our soul affect our deeds and deeds affect our soul. So, and this is also just like David is at the end of his life. He's in his last pages of his last chapter. Joseph is at the end of his life, last pages of his last chapter, with unresolved mess, with brokenness for all the reasons that you've all eloquently portrayed. And so he cries. And then, Michelle, finish that story. What happens next? His brothers.
His brothers went to him themselves, flung themselves before him, and said, "We are prepared to be your slaves." But Joseph said to them, "Have no fear. Am I a substitute for God? Besides, although you intended me harm, God intended it for good, so as to bring about the present result, the survival of many people. And so fear not, I will sustain you and your children." Thus he reassured them, speaking kindly to them.
Right. So the contrast between David's last words, kill him, kill him, kill him, and Joseph's last words, Vayedaber al libam, Vayinachem otam, Vayedaber al libam. He comforted them. He spoke kindly to them. I will sustain you. Don't fear. Couldn't be any more clear. What do you think our tradition is trying to teach us by very deliberate? This is a wine and cheese pairing that is exceptionally intentional. This is an exceptionally intentional wine and cheese pairing. They give us Joseph, who speaks kindly to them and reassures them. Right before he dies, they give us David, who says, kill this one, kill this one, kill this one, before he dies. What is the pshat of our rabbinic tradition pairing these two figures at the end of their lives?
This is what I was thinking. So you said in your teaser, we like to think that in our last chapter we can fix everything that is broken. But then in the commentary, if you look at page 310 towards the bottom of the right column. It says, the last words in each of the 5 books of the Torah, Egypt, Journey, Sinai, Jericho, Israel, are a virtual summary of the Torah's narrative about the people Israel from slavery to Sinai to the Promised Land. It's as though, it's as though life can be wrapped up in a single, 1 hour episode. And the truth is that it can't. Life is not like a work of nonfiction. And so giving us these 2 models gives us the idea that life is complex and that we can't always guarantee what the outcome will be, even in our last days and our last moments.
I'm grateful you brought up the complexity, because to me, this beautiful message of speaking to their hearts and comforting them belies the truth, which is that Joseph has set them up. He's saved all these people, but he's enslaved all the Egyptians, and he's set in motion what will lead to slavery, what will lead to Egyptian hatred of the Jews, what will lead to the oppression of the Jewish people. So on the one hand, he's totally present for his brothers. I will help you. I will support you. On the other, I've taken advantage of the situation, and I have set up the kind of hatred that's going to cause suffering for generations to come.
It's interesting, but they are both using their power, all right?
Totally.
David as a king and Joseph as a minister, well recognized in Egypt. It's very interesting what you brought up.
Yeah, I don't know that I buy that as a subtext here. It's not quite a direct parallel, because these are not actually his deathbed words. His deathbed words come in the next paragraph.
He just says, "Bury me in
where he
in
says,
Canaan." Yeah.
exactly.
But these are his last words to his brother.
These are the last recorded words to
his
brothers, but there are, we don't know how many years in the next verse 22, that Joseph and his father's household remained in Egypt. So we know that they have a long time. And I think really importantly, Eliza, to that sense of, well, what's the toxicity here, is actually bound up in the fact that if these are the last words that he says to them in all of those years, it's very clear that the generosity of the language is not borne out in the closeness of a relationship afterwards.
In other words, right. In other words, where there's unresolved mess, what do you do? And it feels like what Joseph does is he acts with kindness. He does reassure them. He doesn't punish them. He doesn't kill them. He doesn't exercise his power in any way to hurt them. But to the opposite, he exercises his power to sustain them. By the way, I think it's an unfair knock on Joseph. I mean, it is true that the first slaves unto Pharaoh in Egypt were the Egyptians, and that really ticked them off, and they took it out on the Hebrew slaves. But I feel like I don't think you can blame Joseph for that. I mean, this is beyond Joseph's ability. He had a world where there was massive starvation, and he figured out a way how to keep people alive, and that's about as much. He's not a god. He's just a person, smart person. I don't think you can ask more of that. How is he supposed to know that a new king would arise who would be a despot? But bottom line is, despite the brokenness, the unresolved, the sadness from being an immigrant, despite all that emotion, the deeds he does are kind deeds, and his last recorded deeds before extracting a vow that he'll be buried in Canaan is to take care of brothers and sustain them despite their complexity and their checkered past.
Yeah.
Whereas David's last deeds are kill that SOB.
Okay.
So I want to just focus on what do those deeds reflect about the soul of the person who spoke those words, and what do those deeds and those options tell us about our own soul?
I want to say 2 things. First of all, I have a soft spot in my heart for David because of all what he's done with music, and I wouldn't be here if it wouldn't be for King David, the sweet singer of Israel. Anyways, so a couple of things. It looks like, based on the text, Joseph got the ability of living 40 more years than David. And we all know that with time, and as we get older, we get more wisdom. And that's what we attain in our lives. So perhaps Joseph had more time to reflect on what happened in his life and be more at peace. One thing. Second is that he is forgiving his brothers which is very different than forgiving somebody who is not related to you and who humiliated you or attacked you or something like that, where you don't have any relationship. So it's easier to see somebody as evil that you don't know.
So, well put. I want to zoom out from these texts and ask a larger question, which is, I want to come to that question of the evangelical churches that Eliza Griswold covers. How is it with your soul? And what these texts suggest to me is that how is it with your soul is not an entirely passive question, that like we just look at our soul and it is what it is, but that we can actually shape our soul. I think the message of these texts is that we can shape our soul, and that the deeds that we do kind of have an effect on our inner life. And then in turn, the inner life has an effect on the deeds that we do. And so my question to you guys is, what do you do to keep your soul in good repair? What kinds of deeds do you do that sustain your own soul? What kind of deeds do you do that are conducive to the health and the wellness of your soul and of your internal life?
I think that we have to look at ourselves. I believe we are very lucky, the five of us, because the nature of our jobs is to do good to other people. Yesterday, you were, consoling people who lost somebody, and we bring music sometimes to cure people in their souls, and you guys visit people in the hospitals. It's constantly you're doing good deeds. So it's more about what we do outside of our job, because we are lucky enough to have that as part of our, bread and butter every day. And that's more the interesting question that I found.
What comes up for me in these texts is the importance of doing conflict resolution in present tense, both for Joseph and for David, that that things are going to happen. Life is messy, but our challenge is to speak our truth and to do the processing in present tense so that it doesn't fester over years and decades to become a big pain. And if you want to see Joseph as this wholesome, all good at the end, and overlook his, I still think that that it would have been possible for him to keep everybody alive and not put people in slavery. That I think that's possible. He's creating a universe, but putting that aside, every once in a while you have somebody who can live through horrible atrocities and come out with just this view of optimism. I think of Hannah, who was just beaming every day in love, and even though she survived the Holocaust, like her whole life was about hugs of love and generosity. That's a rare occurrence. For most people, they end up like David. If you don't process things in present tense, you end up bitter and revengeful and negative. And so our challenge is, how do we do present tense problem solving and conflict resolution so that we don't reach our end of days bitter?
Yeah, I think that's very important for each of us. And I'll only add to that the ancient wisdom that none of us know which day will be our last. I mean, here you've brought us two stories where it's clear that the end is here, but for so many people walk through life, we never know when we're going to get that next chapter to make a difference, to be able to make those amends, to be able to give those good words. So
And
the
therefore,
time to do it is now.
You opened the conversation today about like how do you get up in the morning with a positive attitude versus those people that are like honking their horns and being upset. It's really interesting. I know people that wake up in the morning and are instantly angry. I try not to do that. What I try to do every night, and it's not easy and it doesn't work all the time. It doesn't work most of the time. But what I try to do is say, reflect on the day, reflect on the week. What can I just let go of, so that when I go to sleep and when I wake up in the morning, I wake up not with anger, not with consternation, but wake up to face the day.
So
it doesn't always work.
Yeah, so let me wrap up with this idea. And Eliza, thank you for the reference to Hannah Berkowitz, our beloved Hannah, who lost all of her family in the Shoah, and yet she wore pink and she wore purple, and she always had a smile, and it was genuine, and she was all about chibuk shel ahava, hugs of love, as you put it. And what I think that teaches us something very important. A happy soul usually does not just flow from happy circumstances, because who has happy circumstances? Who has happy circumstances? So usually a happy soul is the result of conscious choices that are made despite circumstances that aren't happy. That a happy soul is the ability to transcend unhappy circumstances. And it's a result of choices. So I think, here's my takeaway wrap-up lesson. Anger is as anger does, and grace is as grace does. That the deeds that we do shape the inner life that we feel. The rabbis and the Talmud tell us when you do a deed, mitoch shelo lishma ba lishma. You do a deed for the wrong reason, but if you keep doing it, it will end up being for the right reason. And I think all of these texts tell us that the answer to the question, how is your soul, is going to be, what are the deeds that you're doing? Because if you follow the deeds, you will find your soul. Shabbat shalom.
Shalom.